hired to guard the queen at night. But she told me to sleep beside her Kale, a soldier who had seen countless battles and fought in wars across the stars. Never imagined that a simple job like guarding the queen could change the course of his life. He was used to missions in dangerous zones, protecting people who didn't matter to him, and yet this assignment felt different from the moment he received the call. It was late in the evening when the royal messenger arrived with the orders. Kale had been stationed on a distant planet, away from the comfort of familiar faces and routines, and he had just finished a long patrol around the outskirts of the city. The messenger's arrival was unexpected, but not unusual in Kale's line of work. What surprised him was the message itself. He was to leave his post immediately and travel to the capital, where he would be assigned to guard the Queen of the United Systems. The message was brief, but it carried a weight that Kale could sense, even through the simple words on the page. The Queen needed someone new to guard her during the nights, someone strong, reliable, and unflinching in the face of danger. Kale was no stranger to guarding royalty. He had been hired for similar tasks before, but something about this assignment made him uneasy. The Queen was unlike any other ruler in the galaxy. Known for her vast intelligence and powerful presence, she was both loved and feared. Her leadership was crucial to the peace in the galaxy, but her personal life was shrouded in mystery. It was said that no one truly knew the Queen, what she liked, what she feared, or even her true motives. That was why Kale had always been hesitant about working for her. He wasn't one to follow orders blindly, especially when there was so much uncertainty. The journey to the capital was swift, and Kale arrived at the Queen's palace within a few hours. The palace itself was magnificent, standing as a testament to the power and wealth of the Queen's reign. Towering spires, grand halls, and walls adorned with artwork from across the galaxy made the palace feel more like a fortress than a home. As Kale entered the palace, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. He had been in the presence of royalty before, but there was something about the Queen's palace that made him feel small, like an insect standing before a giant. The air inside was heavy with history, and the faint smell of incense lingered in the halls, adding to the sense of something ancient and powerful. He was led to a chamber deep within the palace, where he would meet the Queen for the first time. The room was dimly lit, with heavy curtains drawn across the windows, blocking out the light from the twin moons outside. The only source of light came from a small, glowing orb that hovered above a desk in the corner. The Queen herself stood near the window, her silhouette framed by the soft light coming from the orb. Kale couldn't see her face, but he could sense the presence of someone important, someone whose very being demanded respect. The royal guard who had escorted Kale gave a brief bow before leaving the room, leaving Kale alone with the Queen. Kale stood at attention, waiting for the Queen to speak. He had been trained to be patient and composed, especially in situations like this. But the silence in the room was almost unbearable. After a long moment, the Queen turned to face him. She was striking, tall and graceful, with dark hair that cascaded down her back in soft waves. Her eyes, when they met Kale's, were intense, like they could see straight through him. There was no softness in them, only a sharpness that made Kale feel like he was being scrutinized. The Queen didn't speak at first, simply observing him as though weighing his worth. Finally, she spoke in a calm yet commanding voice. "You are to guard me at night," she said. Her words were simple, but they carried an authority that made Kale stand straighter. "You will be with me while I sleep. But more importantly, you will protect me from those who seek to harm me. There are dangers that lurk in the shadows, and I need someone I can trust." Kale nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He had been briefed on the Queen's enemies, but the true extent of the threat was unknown. There were rumors that her reign was under constant threat from rebel factions, spies, and even members of her own court. Kale's job was simple on the surface: keep watch while the Queen rested. But he knew it would be anything but simple. In his line of work, nothing ever was. The Queen walked closer to him, her gaze never leaving his. "I trust you understand the importance of your role," she said softly, "and I trust that you will not fail." Kale didn't reply at first. The Queen's gaze was intense, but he didn't flinch. He had faced far worse on the battlefield, but this was different. The Queen wasn't just another ruler. She was someone with power that extended beyond anything Kale had ever encountered. She didn't simply rule over the galaxy, she controlled it. "I will protect you with my life, Your Majesty," Kale finally said, his voice steady. She nodded as though satisfied with his answer. Good, you will begin tonight, follow me. She turned and walked towards the door, her footsteps echoing in the quiet room. Kale followed closely behind her, unsure of what to expect. The hallways of the palace were silent, save for the faint sound of their footsteps. There were no guards in sight, no one to witness the exchange between them. It was as though the queen lived in her own world, separate from the rest of her people. Kale couldn't help but wonder what her life was really like behind the closed doors of the palace. They arrived at a large door at the end of a long hallway. The queen paused before it, turning to Kale. "This is my private chamber. You will sleep here beside me as you watch over me during the night." Kale raised an eyebrow at the request. It was unlike anything he had ever been told to do before. To sleep beside the queen? It wasn't a command he had expected, but it was one he would follow. There was something about the queen, something in the way she spoke, that made it clear this wasn't just an ordinary assignment. She opened the door and stepped inside, and Kale followed. The room was luxurious, filled with soft furniture and delicate decorations. At the center of the room stood a large bed draped in silken sheets. The queen sat on the edge of the bed and looked up at Kale. "You will not question me, Kale. You will do as I ask," she said, her voice low and firm. Kale nodded again, his sense of duty overriding any confusion he felt. "Of course, Your Majesty, I will follow your orders." The queen leaned back against the bed, her eyes still focused on him. "You may rest now, but be alert. There are enemies out there who would do anything to see me fall, and I need you to be ready for whatever comes." Kale couldn't help but feel the weight of her words. He had been hired to protect her, but now it seemed there was more to this assignment than he had initially understood. He had no choice but to trust her, even if it meant stepping into a world he didn't fully understand. He lay down on the floor beside her bed, watching as the queen settled herself under the covers. The room was quiet, save for the occasional hum of the palace's inner workings. But as the night wore on, Kale couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. It wasn't just the queen's gaze. There was something else, something far deeper. A presence that seemed to linger in the room as though the palace itself was alive. Kale couldn't help but wonder what secrets the queen was hiding. And as he lay there, he knew that this assignment was only just beginning. The nights grew colder as Kale continued his watch. It had been several days since he had been assigned to guard the queen, and each night was more unsettling than the last. The palace was alive with the hum of distant machinery, the soft whisper of the wind outside, and the occasional sound of footsteps echoing through the long, empty halls. But inside the queen's chamber, all was quiet, save for the gentle sound of her breathing. It wasn't unusual for Kale to keep watch over royalty in the silence of the night. He had done so many times before, but the queen was different. There was something about her that unsettled him, something that he couldn't quite put his finger on. She was not like the others he had protected. Her presence was powerful, almost overwhelming. The way she carried herself, the way she spoke, the way she looked at him. It was as though she was always observing, always testing him, even when she wasn't saying anything. The first few nights were uneventful. Kale remained at his post beside her bed, watching her as she slept. Or at least he thought she was sleeping. He had never seen anyone sleep the way the queen did. Her body lay still, but her eyes were always half closed, as if she were aware of everything around her, even in her sleep. Kale found it hard to believe she was truly resting. There was a constant tension in the air, a sense that something was always on the verge of happening. But it wasn't until the fourth night that the queen spoke to him. She didn't wake him from his vigil. Instead, she spoke to him as if she had been waiting for him to notice. "Kale!" Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it cut through the stillness of the room like a blade. "I know you are watching over me, but I need more than just your vigilance." Kale froze, unsure of what she meant. Her tone was calm, yet there was an underlying command in her words that left him feeling unsettled. He had been trained to remain alert at all times, to never show weakness or hesitation. But now, in the presence of the queen, he found himself questioning his role. "You are here to protect me," she continued, her voice steady and unwavering. But protection is not just about standing guard. It is about understanding the nature of the threat. It is about being close, being able to sense what others cannot. Kale didn't understand. He had always been taught that protection was a physical act, something that could be measured in strength, in readiness, in the ability to defend. But the queen was asking for something more. She wasn't asking him to fight. She wasn't even asking him to be on constant alert. She was asking him to be something else, something different, something more than just a soldier. The queen sat up in her bed, her eyes never leaving his. There was a glint in her gaze, something that Cale couldn't quite decipher. It was as though she was looking at him, but also through him, as if she knew more about him than he could ever know about her. "You are here because you are different," she said. "You are human. You see the world in a way that others cannot. You understand loyalty, honor, and duty, but there is more to see than what lies before your eyes. There is more to this world than you realize." Cale's heart began to race. Her words were cryptic, and they stirred something deep within him. He had always prided himself on his ability to protect, on his understanding of the world around him. But now, faced with the Queen's words, he realized how little he truly understood. "I don't understand, Your Majesty," he replied, his voice steady, though a sense of confusion lingered in his chest. She looked at him with an expression that seemed to contain both sorrow and understanding. "I know," she said quietly, "but you will." With that, the Queen laid back down, closing her eyes once more. Cale stood there for a long time, his mind racing. What did she mean? What was she asking of him? Was he really just here to protect her, or was there something more to his role? The hours passed in silence, but Cale could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. He had never been one to question his orders, but the Queen's words gnawed at him. Was it possible that he was missing something? Was there something more to his role than he had been told? He glanced at the Queen, still lying motionless on her bed. Her face, serene in the soft light, seemed to hold secrets he couldn't comprehend. He had always been taught that the job of a protector was simple: defend, observe, and remain vigilant. But the Queen's presence suggested there was something more, something beyond his training, beyond his understanding. Cale's thoughts were interrupted when the Queen's voice broke through the silence again. "Cale," she said, her voice softer this time, almost as though she was speaking to herself. "You think I am like the others, don't you? You think I am just another ruler, another person to protect. But I am not. I am not like anyone you have ever met." Cale's mind raced as he tried to process her words. What was she trying to say? What made her so different from the others? And why was she confiding in him like this? She continued, as if reading his thoughts. "I am not like the others who have ruled before me. I do not have the same motivations, the same desires. I do not seek power for the sake of power. I seek peace. I seek understanding." "But peace does not come easily, Cale. It is something that must be fought for." The Queen's words were both a warning and a revelation. Cale had always known that peace was hard to come by in the galaxy, but he had never thought of it in such personal terms. The Queen was not just a ruler. She was a person with a vision, with a purpose. But what did that vision entail, and why had she chosen him to protect her? "You will understand, Cale," she said, her voice low but firm. "You will understand what I mean when the time comes. For now, you must be patient. You must learn to trust me, and most importantly, you must learn to trust yourself." Cale stood in silence, his mind reeling with her words. What was he supposed to do with this new knowledge? What did she mean by trust himself? Had he been failing in some way? The Queen's eyes opened slowly, and she met his gaze once again. There was a calmness in her expression, as though she had already made a decision. "Tonight, Cale, I will need more than just your vigilance. I will need you to sleep beside me." Cale's heart skipped a beat. The request was unexpected, but it was also something he had been waiting for in some way. The Queen had never asked him to do anything like this before. It was an odd request, even for someone of her position. But Cale could sense that there was more to it than mere proximity. She wanted him to be close, to understand her in a way that no one else could. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say, but the Queen's unwavering gaze left him little room for doubt. He had no choice but to agree. "As you wish, Your Majesty," Cale said softly. He sat down on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb her. The room grew quiet once more, but Cale could feel a shift in the air. It was as though the weight of the Queen's words had settled over him, leaving him with more questions than answers. But he knew one thing for certain: he had to be prepared. There was more to this mission than he had ever imagined, and the answers lay not just in protecting the Queen, but in understanding her. And for the first time in his career, Cale wasn't sure if he was ready for what was coming next. The quiet in the Queen's chamber was almost suffocating as the night wore on. Cale lay there beside her, trying to sleep but unable to shake the feeling that something far greater was unfolding. The Queen had asked him to stay beside her, and he had agreed, though the request felt strange, even unnerving. He had never been this close to someone so powerful, and yet, as the hours ticked by, Cale couldn't help but wonder if there was something more to her than the political leader everyone saw. At first, he thought he was imagining things. But as he lay there in the stillness, Cale began to notice something. The queen's breathing, although steady, was slightly too calm, almost unnatural. Her chest rose and fell in perfect rhythm, but there was no sound, no gentle shift in her body as she moved in her sleep. It was as though she was frozen in time, caught between wakefulness and slumber. Cale's thoughts raced. He couldn't explain it, but there was an odd aura surrounding the queen, one that filled the room with a sense of mystery. Despite her seeming tranquility, there was an undeniable tension in the air, as if something was just beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered. And then she spoke. "Cale!" The queen's voice was soft but clear, cutting through the silence like a blade. She didn't move, but her eyes opened slightly, their dark depths meeting his gaze. There was something different in her eyes now, a vulnerability he had never seen before. Cale sat up, his mind alert. "Yes, Your Majesty." "You've been wondering, haven't you?" The queen's voice held no trace of accusation, only a calm knowing. "You've been wondering why I asked you to stay here with me, why I made such a strange request." Cale's heart skipped a beat. He had indeed been wondering. But he didn't dare speak the thoughts swirling in his mind. She smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. "I knew from the moment I saw you that you were different from the others. You're not just a soldier, Cale. You are someone who understands loyalty, duty, and honor in a way that most do not. But that's not why I need you here." Cale shifted uncomfortably. "I'm here to protect you, Your Majesty, nothing more." The queen's eyes softened, but her gaze never wavered. "Protection is just part of the job, Cale. There is more to this than just guarding the door. I need someone I can trust, someone who can help me in ways no one else can." Cale didn't understand. What could he possibly do that no one else could? He was just a soldier, a guard. But the queen was speaking in a way that suggested he was more than that. She was asking him to do something beyond his training, beyond his understanding. The silence between them stretched on, heavy with unspoken words. Cale could feel the weight of her gaze on him, urging him to listen, to understand. He sat back, his muscles tense, trying to decipher the meaning behind her words. "You've heard the rumors, haven't you?" the queen continued. "About my past, about who I really am." Cale nodded cautiously. He had heard the whispers, stories of the queen's rise to power, of her mysterious origins, and of the strange abilities that had set her apart from any ruler in the galaxy. Some said she was born with powers beyond comprehension, that she could control the very fabric of space and time itself. Others spoke of darker things, rumors of ancient bloodlines and forbidden pacts. "I am not just a ruler, Cale," the queen said, her voice low and serious. "I am the last of my kind, a descendant of an ancient race that once ruled over the stars. My ancestors were not human. They were beings of immense power, beings who could manipulate the very forces that govern the universe." Cale's heart raced. He had heard the stories, of course, but he had never truly believed them. The idea that the queen was something other than human, something far more dangerous and powerful, seemed impossible. And yet, as he looked into her eyes, he realized that the rumors weren't just stories. They were the truth. "I am a hybrid," the queen continued, as though reading his thoughts. "A mix of human and my ancestors' blood, but that's not all. I carry their power within me. The ability to bend reality to my will, the power to change the course of history itself." Cale felt his breath catch in his throat. This was beyond anything he had ever imagined. He had always known the queen was special, but this was something entirely different. She wasn't just a ruler. She was something far more dangerous, something he wasn't sure he was prepared to face. You're saying you can control time?" Cale asked, his voice barely a whisper. The queen nodded, her expression grave. "Not just time, everything. I can manipulate the flow of events, change outcomes, even create alternate realities. But the more I use my power, the more I risk losing control. That is why I need you here, Cale. I need someone I can trust to keep me grounded. Someone who can help me maintain control before it's too late." Cale's mind spun. He had never been trained to deal with something like this. His entire career had been focused on combat, on physical protection. But this was beyond anything he had encountered. "You're the last of your kind?" Cale asked, his voice tinged with awe and fear. The queen nodded once more. Yes, and because of that I am a target. There are those who seek to steal my power to control me. They want to use my abilities for their own gain. That is why I need you, Kale, not just to protect me physically, but to help me keep my power in check. If I lose control... She trailed off, her gaze distant for a moment as though lost in a memory. Kale could feel the weight of her words. If she lost control, the consequences could be catastrophic. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? Kale asked, his voice trembling slightly. The Queen's eyes met his once more, and this time there was a flicker of something in them, a hint of sadness, perhaps even regret. Because I didn't trust you, she said softly. Not at first, but I've been watching you, Kale. I've been waiting to see if you were the one who could truly protect me, if you could be the one to help me control my power. Kale's mind raced. The Queen's words were a heavy burden to bear, and he was unsure whether he was capable of living up to the task. But there was no turning back now. The truth was out. He had been chosen for something greater than he had ever imagined. He was not just her guard. He was her partner, her protector, and now, it seemed, her confidant. I will do whatever it takes, Your Majesty, Kale said, his voice firm with resolve. I won't let you fall. The Queen's gaze softened, and for the first time since he had met her, Kale saw a hint of warmth in her eyes. Thank you, Kale. You don't know how much that means to me. But even as she spoke those words, Kale could sense the gravity of the situation. The responsibility he had taken on was immense, and the dangers they would face together were far greater than anything he had encountered before. As the night wore on, Kale remained at the Queen's side, his thoughts swirling with the revelations she had shared. The world he had known had shifted beneath him, and the path ahead was unclear. But one thing was certain, his life would never be the same again. The Queen's power, her mysterious origins, and the enemies who sought to take it all from her, they were now his to protect. And as the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, Kale understood that the real battle was just beginning. The days blurred together as Kale continued to guard the Queen. The palace, once a symbol of security and peace, now felt like a fortress under siege. He could sense the tension in the air, thicker with each passing day. Whispers of enemies within the palace and threats from outside were growing louder. But the Queen, ever composed, had not shown any signs of fear. Her resolve was ironclad, her focus unwavering. Yet Kale couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something that would test everything they had. It was on the 6th night of his duty when the attack came. Kale had been on edge all day. The Queen had spent most of the evening in her private chamber, reviewing reports and attending to matters of state. He had done his best to blend into the background, as he always did, but his senses were heightened, sharper than ever. Every sound, every movement seemed amplified in the quiet of the palace. Around midnight, when the corridors were still and silent, a noise broke through the calm. It was a faint, almost imperceptible sound, but Kale's instincts kicked in immediately. He rose from his post beside the Queen's bed, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon at his side. The noise came again, closer this time, a soft thud followed by a faint scraping sound. Kale's heart began to pound in his chest. He had been trained for moments like this, but the quiet was unsettling. He turned to the Queen, who was still lying on her bed, her eyes closed, her breathing slow and steady. At least that's what it seemed like. Kale moved closer, his hand resting on his weapon. The Queen's breathing was too even, too calm. He hesitated. Something was off. He had seen her lie still like this before, but tonight there was an odd tension in the air. It was as if the room itself was holding its breath. Then, with a suddenness that startled him, the Queen's eyes snapped open. They weren't the same eyes Kale had grown accustomed to. There was no warmth, no trust. Instead, they were cold, calculating, and there was a faint, dark energy in them that made Kale's blood run cold. I knew they would come tonight, she said softly, her voice not at all like the one he had heard during their quiet conversations. It was colder, sharper, as though the Queen had become someone else entirely. Your Majesty, what is this? Kale asked, confusion and concern written across his face. Are you? She raised a hand to stop him. Stay close, she said, her voice no longer gentle but commanding. It's time. Before Kale could respond, the door to the Queen's chamber burst open with a violent force, sending shards of wood and metal flying across the room. Figures cloaked in dark armor rushed in, their weapons drawn and their faces hidden. Kale's instincts took over. He didn't wait for orders. His training kicked in and he lunged toward the attackers, drawing his blade in a single fluid motion. But the attackers were fast. too fast. Kale barely had time to react before one of them moved in with a speed he couldn't track, slamming him into the wall with a brutal force. Pain shot through Kale's body as he hit the stone, but he didn't let it slow him. He fought back, swinging his blade with precision, but the figures were relentless, their movements perfectly coordinated. He could feel the queen's presence behind him, but she wasn't just standing there. She was doing something. Kale didn't know what, but he could sense her power building, radiating from her in waves. The attackers seemed to know what was coming. They hesitated, eyes flicking toward her with an expression of fear Kale had never seen before. Suddenly the queen spoke again, her voice echoing through the room, amplified by an unseen force. "Enough!" The command wasn't shouted, but it was felt. The room seemed to vibrate with her words. Kale's attackers froze, their weapons lowered, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. It wasn't the power of a ruler, it was the power of something much darker, something ancient. Kale couldn't understand it, but he could feel it, and it terrified him. The queen stepped forward, her movements deliberate and slow. "You are too late," she said, her voice now carrying an authority that made Kale's skin crawl. "I've been expecting you." One of the attackers, a man with a scar across his face, took a step forward, his voice low and threatening. "You should have known better than to trust a human, Your Majesty. Your blood will be ours." The queen's eyes flashed with anger. "My blood belongs to no one," she said, her voice colder than ice. With a flick of her hand, the room seemed to warp around them, the air thickening as though it was becoming more difficult to breathe. The attackers staggered, their faces twisted in pain, their bodies frozen in place. Kale watched in awe and fear as the queen's power expanded, bending the room around them. "Get out," she commanded, her voice laced with the power of centuries. Now, the attackers didn't move. They couldn't, their bodies trembled, their breaths shallow, as though the very air had become too thick for them to survive. Kale didn't understand what was happening, but he could feel the queen's power building to a breaking point. The figures in front of him were no longer just men. They were pawns, helpless before the queen's might. And then, with a wave of her hand, the room exploded with a force that sent Kale crashing to the floor. The attackers were thrown back against the walls, their bodies crumpling to the ground with sickening thuds. The queen stood at the center of the room, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light, her body still as stone. Kale pushed himself to his feet, his body aching from the impact. He looked at the queen, his heart pounding in his chest. What had she just done? What was she? The queen turned to face him, her expression returning to the calm, collected mask he had grown accustomed to. "They were sent by those who seek to control me," she said, her voice steady once more. "They want my power, but they will never have it." Kale couldn't respond. He was still reeling from the power he had just witnessed. The queen was not just a ruler. She was something much more dangerous, and he had been drawn into a battle far beyond anything he had ever imagined. "They will come again," she said, her voice soft but filled with certainty. "But next time, Kale, we will be ready." Kale nodded, though he was unsure of what it meant to be ready. He had been trained to fight wars, to protect lives. But what he had just seen was not a war. It was a force of nature, a power that Kale could barely comprehend. The queen turned her back to him, her eyes scanning the wreckage in the room. "Help me clean this up," she said, her tone soft but carrying an authority that left no room for argument. Kale stood still for a moment, still in shock. He had been hired to protect her, to stand by her side as she slept. But now he realized that his role was much more than just a guard. He was part of something much larger. The queen was a force, a being whose power could reshape the very fabric of reality. And Kale was her protector. As he moved to help her, Kale realized that his life had changed forever. The battle had only just begun, and the stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined. But he wasn't afraid, not anymore. He had made a choice, and now, more than ever, he knew he had to stand by the queen. No matter what, the aftermath of the attack left the palace in a state of chaos. Guards scrambled to assess the damage, the air filled with the faint scent of smoke and the low hum of emergency systems kicking into action. Kale stood in the queen's chamber, his mind racing, still processing everything that had unfolded. He had seen unimaginable power tonight, the queen's power. And now, standing amidst the wreckage of what had been an ordinary night, he felt as though his life had been irreversibly changed. The queen stood calmly at the center of the room, her expression unreadable. It was almost as though nothing had happened. Despite the destruction, the shattered door, and the fallen attackers, she appeared untouched by it all. Her demeanor was as composed as ever, as if she were simply going about her nightly routine. Cale felt a mixture of awe and fear as he watched her. The power she had displayed was unlike anything he had ever witnessed, even in the most intense battles he had fought. But it wasn't just her power that unsettled him. It was the quiet confidence she held, as if she knew exactly what was coming, as if she had seen this moment play out 1,000 times before. "Are you all right?" Cale asked, his voice quieter than he intended. He wasn't sure why he asked, as the queen had been the one to handle the attackers effortlessly. But something in her gaze made him feel as if he needed to say something. The queen turned her gaze to him, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "I am fine," she replied calmly. "But you are the one who must decide now." Cale's brows furrowed in confusion. "Decide," she nodded, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You've seen the true nature of this war, Cale. It's not a war of soldiers, it's a war of power. A war for control over forces that could reshape everything. And now you are a part of it. You are tied to me, whether you like it or not." Cale took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words settle on his shoulders. He had been hired to guard the queen, to protect her from threats. But what he had just witnessed went far beyond simple protection. He had become entangled in something much larger than himself. The queen's enemies were not just political rivals, they were after her power. And that power, Cale now understood, was not something anyone could wield lightly. "I didn't sign up for this," Cale said quietly, though he didn't feel angry, just uncertain. He had been trained to fight, to protect, to serve. But this was different. It was as though he had stepped into a world he wasn't prepared for, one where the rules didn't apply and the stakes were unimaginable. The queen seemed to understand, her expression softening for the first time since the attack. "I know," she said. "But it's too late for you to turn back now. You've seen too much, you know too much, and there is no place for hesitation in this fight." Cale swallowed hard, his mind filled with conflicting thoughts. He had always believed that protecting others was simple. Defend those who needed it, fight for what was right, and everything else would fall into place. But now he was faced with a decision that could change the fate of not just the queen, but the entire galaxy. "Then what do you expect me to do?" Cale asked, his voice rough with the weight of his uncertainty. "You're telling me that I'm involved in something far bigger than I ever signed up for. What am I supposed to do with that?" The queen took a slow step forward, her gaze never leaving his. "You are the only one who can protect me, Cale, and more importantly, you are the only one who can help me control the power I hold within me. You are not just my protector. You are my ally, my partner. You must decide if you are willing to stand with me against the forces that seek to tear us apart." Cale's heart raced as he processed her words. He had always been a soldier. He had always been ready to fight, to defend. But this was different. This wasn't just about protecting someone from an enemy. This was about choosing a side in a battle that was as much about survival as it was about power. For a long moment, Cale was silent. He looked at the queen, his mind swirling with doubt and fear. Could he trust her? Could he really stand by her side in a fight like this? The enemies she had spoken of were powerful, dangerous. And he, Cale, was just a soldier. What chance did he have? But then he remembered the way she had stood before the attackers, her calm command shaking the very air around them. He remembered the look in her eyes, the raw power that had radiated from her as she fought. This wasn't just about protecting her anymore. This was about protecting something greater, something that could change the course of history. Cale's mind was made up. He had come this far, and there was no turning back now. He had seen too much, understood too much. He couldn't walk away from this, not now. "I'll stand with you," he said, his voice steady now. "I'll help you, I'll protect you, and I'll help you control your power." The queen's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, Cale thought he saw a flicker of something like relief in her eyes. But it was gone almost instantly, replaced by the same calm, unshakable confidence. "Good," she said, her voice firm. "You've made the right choice, Cale, but understand this. The path ahead will not be easy. There are forces out there that will stop at nothing to take me down. To take us down, we will face enemies both known and unknown, and we must be ready for whatever comes next." Cale nodded, the weight of her words settling in his chest. He wasn't sure what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't do this alone, and he wouldn't. Together, he and the queen had to face the unknown, step into the darkness, and fight for a future that was far from certain. The queen turned away, her gaze focused on the shattered door that had once protected them from the attackers. "The real fight begins now," she said softly, almost to herself. "We must prepare, we must be ready for whatever comes." Kale watched her for a moment before turning to the wreckage around them. The palace had been breached. The attackers had been defeated, but the battle was far from over. He could feel it in his bones, the quiet before the storm. And he knew that the war for the Queen's power was just beginning. Together, they would face whatever came next. Together, they would fight. And Kale, once a simple soldier, now stood at the beginning of something far greater than he could have ever imagined. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: he would not stand alone. As the first light of dawn broke through the shattered windows, Kale made his decision. He was all in. He would fight for the Queen, for the power she held, and for the future of the galaxy. No matter what it took, it was time to prepare for the war that was coming. And this time, Kale wouldn't just be a protector. He would be her partner, her ally, and together, they would face the forces that sought to destroy them.